We're excited to speak with Daniel McDonald, economic PhD and associate professor of economics at Cal State San Bernardino, as well as co-author of a study on raising minimum wages and prices that I'm really excited to discuss today. But I did want to start by saying thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Brandon. I look forward to the conversation and thanks for reaching out.
Definitely, and we're our pleasure. The pleasure is always to have you. So one of the first things that I read in the paper in regards to costs being passed on to the consumer and raising minimum wage, and your paper found that the pass-through effect is much smaller than was previously reported. Could you explain what you found and how it differs from what some of the previous reporting was?
Sure, yeah. So what we found was really exciting. We found that when cities raise their minimum wage or when states raise their minimum wage, the ultimate burden of that minimum wage increase that's passed on to consumers is pretty minimal. We're talking, maybe 5, 7 cents on a $5 hamburger. It's really a minor price increase, and it differs from previous research that found much larger price increases. And I believe that one of the benefits of our study was that we used, as far as we could, the most recent data, which includes, hundreds of minimum wage increases, and we looked at a broad range of cities across the US. So what we were basically able to do was look at a city that increased its minimum wage, compare it to a city that didn't increase its minimum wage, and look to see what was the difference in the prices of fast food products in both of those cities. So it's this kind of compare and contrast approach that allowed us to basically find that the ultimate pass-through effect of the increase in the minimum wage onto consumers was pretty small. And again, it was because of our approach and the fact that we had used so many minimum wage change events, so to speak, that we were able to prove this result.
Yeah, so I guess just to make sure to clarify, like it's nowhere near what the raise of the minimum wage would be. I know a lot what you hear a lot of people say is like, oh well, if you raise minimum wage, they'll raise the prices and it won't even be like you get a raise. So it was none of that seemed to be true in what you found.
No, absolutely not. I mean, first of all, if the minimum wage increases by 10%, for example, you're not going to see a 10% increase in the price of a hamburger or, a value meal or something, simply because labor costs are not the only thing that companies have to concern themselves with, right?
Mhm.
Yes, labor costs are a significant portion of restaurant budgets, right? But they have to also spend money on food, right? All the inputs that go into making the products. They have to pay for overhead, right? Rent for the building that they're operating in. So they have a lot of other costs, and labor costs are significant. I'm not saying that, and I'm not trying to diminish the very real impact that this can have on, people who own restaurants who are not exactly the, most of them are not the super wealthy to begin with. Um, and so I understand that, but labor costs are just a fraction of that percent. And then when you also account for the fact that these restaurants operate in very competitive environments, right? The people that are looking to buy like a burger or, a fries or drink or whatever, they have places to choose from, right? So you can't just raise prices by that much if you want to continue to capture customers, right? So that's another kind of downward pressure that we see on prices, which limits the ability of these companies to, pass the minimum wage increase onto their consumers.
Was there any variables to this that you found? I know I think one that I saw or something that was in the paper I saw was that it was smaller when minimum wage was indexed to inflation or CPI, I think. Was there
Mhm.
anything else like that, or could you even explain kind of how that had a effect on the pass-through effects?
Sure, yeah. I don't remember the other effects that we looked at, although we did look at just overall how prices play a role in the economy. So our outcome variable was fast food prices, right? But obviously, like I was just saying, right, if the price of, meat goes up or, hamburger buns, right, that plays a role as well. And so we were able to account for those or control for those. That's the econometric term. And so that was one of the variables that was shown to basically say that, well, once you account for these prices and how they change by metro area, the impact specifically of the minimum wage, right, on fast food prices is small. But you're right that when when cities index their minimum wage to the overall inflation level in the economy, that can help make things more predictable for businesses, right? So if businesses are able to account or kind of predict, oh, we know that there's going to be this price increase coming up, they can prepare, or sorry, this minimum wage increase, they can prepare for it in other ways, right? And that can kind of lessen the that immediate impact that a minimum wage might have. Now, even when the minimum wage is increased, right, it's usually because a legislature has voted to increase on it a few months before, right? So it is still, it is true that businesses have some predictability already, but I think the indexation kind of helps a little bit more with that and makes it a little bit easier for businesses to handle these increase. And again, I think it's through the predictability of it. Now, not a lot of metro areas index, right? That's the other issue, I think, is that we didn't have a lot of examples of that to kind of analyze. But that was something that was an interesting finding.
Yeah, and kind of about the predictability, I wanted to talk about the timeline kind of, because as you said, like with it being passed in legislature, obviously you have like months before it gets passed, there's obviously the months after. Could you speak about how the prices like that in terms of what is passed through, do they fluctuate throughout the months? Because I'm sure it's not just prices are this way, minimum wage changes and that day it all happens, does it fluctuate throughout? Is it kind of a gradual rise? And then to that same respect, does it level out after a couple months, or how is that kind of seen?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. And um, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and it's a really excellent question, is to basically get at the dynamics of these responses, right, that these businesses have to the minimum wage increase. And it is true that we see a little bit of a bump in prices prior to the minimum wage going up sometimes, but pretty much it's all concentrated on the month that the minimum wage increases. So if the minimum wage increases in April, you'll see a bump in the April CPI, which translates into a little bit of extra inflation that month than in the previous month, or, and this is, I think, to your question, or in later months. So it's not like you see these inflationary effects continue into May, June, July, right? It's really concentrated in that one month. And then and now, when I say that too, I want to just clarify, right? It's not that prices go up and then they return back to normal, right? It's that prices go up, there's a little bit of an extra bump, but then they kind of remain on a similar trajectory, right? So it's not like businesses correct and go back. That's not, that's definitely not true. But it is true that that bump is just kind of it's just a 1 month thing that is felt, by the consumer, and then that price is not like, it's not like the businesses add another one of those in the following month and then another bump the next month, right? So it really does speak to, I think, as I was saying earlier, that these businesses need to stay competitive, right? These businesses have a bottom line, yes, but they also have customers. They have demand that they need to attract, and they need to do a lot of research to make sure that if they are going to raise prices, it's not going to affect their overall market reach, right? I think it's very important to realize this. When you read in the news, like social media or a news article, and they interview a restaurant owner, right? That's just one restaurant owner, right? We're just talking about one, right? The data that our study was based on is based on hundreds of restaurants, right? Over hundreds of or thousands of restaurants, over hundreds of minimum wage changes, right? So yeah, you can pick out one person that's gonna, say that they're upset and, this is gonna cause them to shut down their business, but it's important to look at the overall behavior, right? And to get the big picture in mind here, in order to avoid making these kind of dramatic claims.
From what you saw, did the big picture reflect any of those kind of small horror stories, so to speak, that you see getting displayed a lot?
No, absolutely not. Now, there is research, of course, on other aspects of the minimum wage. So, um, first of all, employment, right? That's the big one, jobs, right? And most of this research finds very little effect, maybe even a little bit of a positive effect of the minimum wage on employment. And I can speak to that a little bit later if you'd like. But in general, right, very small, very small employment effects. And then when you look at, let's say, small business closures, right? Look at data on, businesses and whether this minimum wage is causing businesses to, shut down. We don't see those kinds of results either. So, I mean, it's true. We just looked at a very specific aspect of the question, right? We just looked at prices, but the evidence is very much in line with what has been found with the other research, that these things don't cause these horror stories that you were just referring to. That it's much more of a kind of a mild thing when you look at the evidence.
Sure. And you mentioned employment and the effects minimum wage has on that. I'd love to hear to the extent you could speak on what is kind of seen through the data on that.
Again, when you do the same kind of approach, you analyze states that have minimum wage increases and you compare them to a state that didn't see a minimum wage increase. And you find that the state that raised the minimum wage saw very little, if any, disemployment at all. Very little reduction in employment, or maybe even a small bump in employment. And the studies have gotten so clever with this. They look, for example, let's say you take Pennsylvania and New Jersey, right? New Jersey and they share a border, right? Western New Jersey and Eastern Pennsylvania. You analyze the counties that only lie along that border, right, of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And further, let's focus even more specifically on kind of the southern part of each state, because once you get into like Northeast, you get close to Philly or like the northern New Jersey cities, right? You look at the restaurants on either side of the border, right? New Jersey, Pennsylvania border. And you find, right, that these are similar markets, they're similar labor markets and similar product markets, and you find very little impact when, say, New Jersey raises their minimum wage and Pennsylvania doesn't. So they've gotten very clever, studies have gotten very clever with the level of detail that they're able to actually analyze this. I mean, that's just Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Take, any two states that might have one state passing a minimum wage and the other doesn't, right? And analyze the border. And this is what you find. So the studies have gotten very sophisticated, especially with employment, just because it's such a big deal, and have not found much of an impact at all.
Yeah, and one more thing, I guess, kind of jumping back to prices quickly, that your study did mention was that you were kind of talking about small versus big minimum wage hikes, and it said that small minimum wage hikes could even lead to a decrease in prices. Could you kind of speak on how this is so and what that might mean about low wage labor markets?
Sure. Another very excellent question, by the way. So, in cases of kind of smaller or more moderate minimum wage increases, the reason why we might even find somewhat of a positive impact is the following. Minimum wage is Raising the minimum wage is an absolutely good thing. Minimum wage has been passed in Republican states, Democratic states. We just saw this last week, right? There have been some states like Missouri that passed laws that are increasing their minimum wage. Workers know it's a good thing. Now, what does it do, right? When the minimum wage increases, it attracts more workers to these establishments. More workers, there's a more of an incentive to work if workers are actually getting paid a decent wage for what they're doing, right? So there's an increasing willingness to work. And not just that, but it's an increase in the quality of the workers, right? Good workers all of a sudden see that, this job could pay well, right? It could be a good opportunity for them. And we all know what happens when, you get more productive workers, right, who are willing to work at your establishment. You get more productive businesses, right? And so what happens is basically you get more supply, you get more restaurants, in fact, not less, right? It sounds kind of strange, but that's the logic, right? As workers become more willing to, get off the couch and, start start looking for one of these jobs because now they're paying a decent wage, then you've got more people willing to work at these jobs, and these restaurants become more competitive. They become more productive. And so as a result, prices might even go down a little bit, right? Because if there's more competition, if there's more production going on, more productivity, then in economics terms, Econ 101, that shifts the supply curve out. And it means that prices might actually go down a little bit. And so that's how you get those effects. And we see those again more with the smaller minimum wage increases because there's less of that kind of bite on the demand side that the employers might feel from a bigger kind of like a 10 or 15% minimum wage hike, which can affect them, although like I was saying earlier, just briefly, like for that like small month around the minimum wage increase. But that's the logic, is that basically you're attracting workers into these industries that are more efficient, more productive, and this has positive benefits on the economy down over time.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you again for taking time to speak with us. If you want to shoot me some links on your email, I'll put it in the description. I'll also have a link to the study that we were discussing in the description if anyone wants to look over it. But yeah, I appreciate you speaking with me.
Of course, yeah. Thanks again, Brandon. It was a great opportunity.
Awesome,
Good
and
luck
I
with
hope
everything.
thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.